We're live the whole time anyway. Um, cool. So, hey, it's Dan. We got Tommy. We got Mark. Um, I don't see anyone else watching right now. Hmm. Cool. So, Tommy, do you want to sort of share the code you worked on from the changes you made to it last week, and then I guess like I can talk about my solution too.
Yeah, sure, sure. Let me get it set up here. 1 second. All right. Okay, so can you see my screen here?
Yeah. Could you make the font a little bigger?
Yes. There we go. Does that work?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I basically redid everything from last week. Just started from scratch and worked my way through the tests that you had put up to help out. So I worked off of that, and then I also added some of my own tests for some other things as well. But I definitely narrowed down the scope of the code and simplified it as much as I could. So I can sort of walk through what I did. And this is all up on GitHub as well. I can post a link to it. I'll still be working on it a little bit because there's still some organization I want to do, just to put everything sort of in folders and whatnot. But here's the basics. So, oops. So what I have here, we've got the main antiup.js file, which is the same file that Dan you had put up, and I had just basically added a lot to it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how I approached it. So I was going through and I started out trying to think of how to compare all the hands and how to get the value of each hand and whatnot. And I started with a similar approach that I did last time, but then I thought, man, there's got to be an easier way to do this, especially once you start talking about ties and different things like that. Like, how do you handle having the two highest hands being a pair, but of different types, like a pair of fives versus a pair of fours.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned last week that there was an interesting approach that somebody took to it. I think I said Cactus Jack. I think it's actually Cactus Kev, and I can post a link to that too. But the way he does it is pretty crazy with bit shifting and whatnot. But I kind of took a little bit from it. So instead of having a giant if-else statement of, okay, if we see, four of the same value, then it's a four of a kind, blah, 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 I basically just made a lookup table in JSON. So this first line here, this data equals require poker data.json. So I basically made this file here, pokerdata.json. We can take a look at it here. And it lists basically every unique poker hand that you have. Now, I didn't go and brute force all this through. I've sort of looked at the way the table was set up that the guy has. There's a link to it. He basically has the rankings of every single hand all the way down.
Huh.
And that way, every single hand has a unique value. So as long as you can get the hand to basically equal the key, then you can see what its value is or its rank. So this
Okay.
so this top one here, right? This would be a royal flush. The way I have it set up is, it's each of these numbers are sort of the corresponding card values, right? So 14 is ace, 13 is king, 12 queen, jack, 10, and then obviously the numbers are its own. So you've got so there's 5 numbers in each of these representing the 5 cards in your hand, not counting the suits, right? We're just looking at the values for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then this F or NF stands for if it's a flush or if it's not a flush. So, for example, right, a straight flush from ace to 10, it would be higher than if you scroll down to wherever I have the straight from ace to 10, which is not a flush. So this
Wow. How many lines is this file?
it's well, just the hands together, it's 7,462, which is the exact number. So it was interesting. When I was going through it, I was thinking, well, maybe I can type this out or put it in Excel and then somehow use something to translate it. And then I don't have the code on my computer right now because I was working on it on my work computer actually. But basically, I went through and made a file that basically spit out this entire object using a whole bunch of loops and a whole mess of stuff.
Okay.
And I can post that up somewhere too, but when I got that to work, I was super ecstatic because I thought, oh, okay, this is going to make it a lot easier. So we've got that, and then so there's basically two objects in that data file. There's the hand ranks, which is what we just saw, and then I also put in the card ranks. So this is just a 2 up to an ace and what that translates to. So ace is a 14, like we showed before.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta fix the space. I'm not sure why the spacing is weird on this, so I'll adjust that later. But I stored that in card ranks. So we have these two objects here that we pull from the data file, and then that's what we use to do a lot of the comparisons. So I've got this file split up into two sections. So we've got the helper methods, and then down below we have the static methods. So this is what you can actually use if you're going to use the anti-up module library in something else. So the first one sort of satisfies the very first requirement of the challenge, which is return the type of hand it is. So this is what's going to tell you if it's a pair or a high card or a straight flush, whatnot. So it's using some helper methods. Basically, it's taking in a hand, which is just an array of cards, just array of strings, like ace of diamonds would be AD, 2 of clubs would be 2C, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's taking that and it's returning its rank, and then changing that rank into its string form. So basically, this hand rank, what it does is it uses the data file and gives you its ranking. Got a couple different variables here. The first one is values. So there's a helper method called getValues, which just goes through and returns the value of whatever the card is. So if the card is an ace in your hand, then it's going to change it and make it a 14.
Okay.
So it just takes the cards, which is an array, and maps it out. So instead of saying ace of diamonds, it says 14. It just gives you the number value of each of the cards. That's essentially what this does. It's a little more convoluted because since there's a 10, then you can have some strings that are length of 3 instead of 2. So it's just looking for that. So basically, if card length is greater than 2, then it's going to give you the first 2 numbers. Otherwise, we're going to just take the first letter or number and give you the rank.
And I remember from last week that when you would solve the problem yourself, you'd encoded 10s as the letter T. So that was just like my choice for writing the test suite. But
right. Yeah, and I just want to go ahead and match that because I think in the challenge in the blog itself, it was using 10. So I just thought it's an extra line. I'll just put it in there just in case. Then there's a couple other ones here. So get suits. This is how we figure out what we use to figure out if there's a flush, or it helps to figure out. So basically, this is the same thing as get values. Instead, it just takes whatever the last letter in the string is. So if it's an ace of diamonds, it returns the D. If it's 2 of clubs, it returns the C, and maps that out. Then it takes that. We take the get suits and we'll put it into this check flush, and this just goes through and checks. Basically, is everything the same? Like, is each letter the same? If not, then it's not a flush because all the suits have to be the same. Otherwise, it's going to return true if they are all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So yeah, hand rank. So that's values. That's flush. On the values, I also sort the values. So it going from highest to lowest. So that way I can always make sure that it matches up with a key in my table, because all the keys in my table are sorted by highest to lowest as well.
Okay.
Because otherwise you could have them out of order and then there's no real way to match them up with a key, or otherwise you'd have to add a whole bunch of other lines of code to correspond to each individual, order of the cards that you get.
Mm-hmm.
So I just sort them to make it easier. So we get the values and sort them, and then we check for a flush. If it is a flush, if every hand has the same suit, then we're going to add this little F, right, that we saw in the lookup table. And then if it's not a flush, we'll put NF. And then to create the key, we just take the values that we get and we join them together with an underscore. And then we add this little underscore F or underscore NF. And then we plug that into the hand ranks. So in the end, when you get a hand, so let's say we have a hand like this, right, where it's 10, 8, 7, 5, and 3, and and they're not the same, then that's what, if you were to give a hand like that, this is what the key should return when you put it into that function. In which case, it'll give you this value, 7381. So that's its ranking in relation to all the other hands. And then we put that into this method, this rank to string, and all this does is just, it looks at your number, and if it's within a certain range, it tells you what type it is. So all of these are sorted, right, based on their value.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all in order. So straight flush, the first 10 unique hands that are straight flushes are the highest or the best that you can, and then you go all the way down to high card. So it just takes whatever the rank is and then just returns whatever the string value associated with it is.
Cool. All right.
So that's what gives you the type. Real quickly, I also check for duplicates, or I have a function that checks for duplicates. So essentially what this does, I won't go into it too deeply, but there's a helper method called histogram. And it just goes through and counts up how many times each string was used. And then it runs through the keys in the histogram and the occurrences here. And if it sees that a card was used more than once, then it's going to return. It basically filters through and sees if there's any cards that have been used more than once.
Cool.
And then it returns a Boolean value if the length is greater than 0. So if you have 2 aces of diamonds in your hand, then it's going to return true because it says, oh, we see the same card was used twice. Therefore, there's a duplicate.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I have a histogram method in my solution too, which I think that's funny. Cool. So what else was there? There was the you've got on line 94 here.
Yeah. So this is
hands. Will it?
Yeah. So this is how it decides the winner between different hands. So this function winner, it takes in hands. So what I do is I check. I have a couple of checks here. So one, it checks if there's no hands, then it's just going to return -1. That's sort of its check to say, well, there's no hands in this.
Okay.
Next, it's going to check and see one, if there's only one hand that it returns, then it's going to return 0. But it also checks to see if you pass, because you can pass in hands 2 different ways, and I have tests for this. So one, you can just pass it in normal parameters, so you can have just 3 separate arrays of cards. Or you can pass it in as an array of arrays. So you can have an array of hands.
Mm-hmm.
So this checks to make sure that, okay, well, if there is only one argument here, is it an array of arrays? Because if it is, then we don't just want to return 0, meaning the winner is the only hand that's that was passed through. This makes sure that we also check to see, if, even though it's only one parameter, if there are arrays within that.
Mm-hmm.
Then it goes through and returns and checks again. So if it is an array of arrays, then we pass that array of arrays to this getRanks method, which I'll show in a second. Otherwise, if there are multiple arguments, then we use this here, which basically just takes all the arguments that you have. So if you have a variable amount of arguments that is passed, so you can pass it 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, and this just returns an array of all the arguments you have. and then we pass that array to get ranks, because get ranks is expecting an array.
Cool.
And the ranks, all that does is it just returns the number values for each. I think we saw
from the 7,000 line JSON file.
Right. It just, well, it doesn't return the hand rank or the like it returns like each card rank basically. I think. Or no, you're right. You're right. It returns the rank of your hand. So then of each hand. So if you had a straight flush, then your hand rank could be 1. If you had some sort of high card, then it could be in the 6,000s or 7,000s. And it stores all that into an array. So if you had 3 hands, then you'd have 3 ranks, 3 hand ranks. Then we pass it to this helper method called min_index. And all it does is it just returns the index of the element that has the lowest value.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we're looking for the lowest value because the lower the value, the better ranking hand it is.
Right.
So all we do here is we do this little trick here where we can call min, like math.min, and put it on an array instead of passing in numbers to it. And then we take that minimum value and find the index of it in the array and then return it. So if we looked at, let me open up the test.
Cool. So
here.
Okay. So what ends up happening is if you give it an array of 3 different hands, it'll tell you the index of the hand that won.
Right, of the best hand. So for example, if we looked at, here's one with no ties, yeah. So here we've got a high card, 1 pair, and a 2 pair. So this hand is a high card, this hand has 1 pair, and this hand has 2 pair. So we'd expect the 2 pair hand to win because it's the best hand. So since there's 3 items in that we pass into the winner function, then we'd expect it to return the index 2, which corresponds to the index that has the 2 pair hand. So it's just giving you the index of whatever the best hand is.
Oh, cool.
And that's pretty much it for this. But what I've also got it to do, similar to what I showed before when I showed it on a website where, like, basically a little app where you could deal out hands and see the cards in action. See if I can pull this up here. So what we have, it's similar. So I have an extra JavaScript file just for demo purposes for this. Mm-hmm. So what you can do is if you click deal hands, it's not showing the winner for some reason, so I'll have to look at that. But basically what it does is it just goes through and takes a random value and a random suit and plugs them out here. So we're not creating like a card object like I did last time. It's just literally taking a random rank and a random suit, puts them together, does that 5 times, and that gives you your hand. And then I also have it hooked up to another sort of GitHub library, which will give you the picture of the card itself. It somehow creates the image file that you need.
I remember that. Yeah, you're not actually sharing that right now. I don't know if you meant to, but.
Oh, are you not seeing the screen?
No, I'm still just looking at Sublime Text, which is probably just the way you did the screen share.
Oh, okay, yeah. Give me 1 second here, and I can see if I can switch it. There we go. Okay, so what should be happening, and it was working earlier, so I'm not sure why it's not, is it should be showing the winner down at the bottom, so it would show the 1 pair. And then, oh, now it does, all of a sudden, for whatever reason. So I'll have to figure that out. But
you had 5 2s there, which maybe was throwing you an error.
Oh, that may have been what it was. That's probably what it was. So yeah, basically every time you hit deal hands, it's just going to give you four just random hands, and then it'll it should give you the best hand out of those. And I also have it to where I can also check for duplicates on this. So for example, if you see the winner down here has 2 tens of diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have it switched to false right now, but I have a function in there which, if we turned it on, it would also go through, and if there's a hand that has duplicates, it would say, warning, there's duplicates. Let me see if I can actually, it's going to take me a minute to get that switched around because I have to set up the Browserify bundler thing on this. But yeah, basically, got it to work on here, and it's working pretty well. I just have to figure out, what those weird cases where it just didn't show up. But yeah, and I mean, you can run it from the command line as well, and you can actually just pass it in your own, array of cards, and it would work as well. And I could show that too if you want to see that. But I just wanted to put it on the big screen here for.
Yeah, this is very cool. I think you're not too far off from having something that looks like a game.
Yeah, and I did it without, creating a deck and all that. So it was a lot simpler and a lot easier to change around. So for example, when I went to the lookup table method rather than having giant if-else statement and looping and whatnot, it was a lot easier to change to that than it would have been previously when I had all these different objects and they all had these very specific methods and functions. It was just a lot harder to maintain.
Cool. Well, I think is that everything that you came up with?
Yeah, I could. There's extra code that goes along with obviously with the site itself and the demo code, but I'll put that up on GitHub. I don't want to take up the entire time here, so I've got it up on GitHub. And I've got it
sure, yeah, put it up on GitHub.
So yeah, if you want to check it out, then take a look at that, and I'll be updating it a little bit as we go as well.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll share mine now. Let me make sure. Slack and oh, that's the project. So let's see. So let me do a screen share. Wait. I haven't looked at this code since last week, so hopefully I can remember what's all going on.
I know that's what I was doing. I was trying to look back at the code I had that I showed last time. I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay, so I've got that. I'll open up the spec runner file, and it should all be passing. Yeah, there we go. So those are all passing.
Cool.
I didn't do the extra stuff that you worked through, so I'll just talk about my own code. So I'm gonna so I actually added. I tried to be really object oriented about this.
Mm-hmm.
So can you see my font size? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I've got the primary anti-up object here. And it takes as arguments an analyzer and a describer. So I've got so I have these two objects: a hand analyzer and a hand describer. So okay. I'll talk about what those return later. So this is using traditional IFI format of they're given variable names up top, and then on the last line passed in as their objects. And what the way that the read function works is that the analyzer takes the string of cards that's input and turns out this object that just tells you about the the patterns in the cards, and then the describer takes those suit count, value pattern, and like this has consecutive values, like basically is it a flush, and it takes those as arguments and then tells you what kind of hand it is. So let's see. Yeah, so the read function for the hand analyzer just takes that array of cards, the 5 strings, and it does like a bunch of stuff. So set hand, for instance, right here, it for each like string in the array, it turns it into a card object. So it'll like it'll give you an object that has a value, which is 10 if the string length is 3, and then the suit is just the second character. So it maintains the character, and then if it's not a 10, then it's just the first character is the value and the second character is the string, right? So instead of an array of 5 strings, we now have an array of 5 card objects.
Okay.
So then it, on line 6, it creates a suits histogram. So I have this histogrammer function. Let me see if I can find that. This was like, yeah, here we go. So the histogrammer function takes the hand of card objects and the attribute you're looking for, and it looks through each card essentially and like creates a histogram object, and then for each value of that attribute, it'll create an entry in the histogram object and then like iterate it up by 1 if it occurs more than once. So for instance, if I'm looking for suits, if I give it a flush hand and I say, give me a suits histogram, it'll look at each of those and it'll say this first one's a club. I'm going to create a club key on the histogram and give it a value of 1. And then it'll look at the next hand and say, okay, the club key already exists, so I'm going to iterate it up by 1. So it's 2. So if you give it a flush hand, it'll return club 5, right? And that'll be what's in your suits histogram. So there's that. And then I think the next one is, values histogram. So something like, if you give it a straight, oh, your dog's gonna upset my cat. If you give it a straight, then the histogram will, return, it'll have 5 entries in the histogram object and it'll all be 1. So this is useful for instance, looking for pairs or full houses, because you'll get a values histogram back where there are 2 of one kind of thing and 3 of another kind of thing, or 3 of something and 1 of 2 other things, so it's 3 of a kind, right? So this is sort of where I arrived at after just sitting down and saying, okay, well, if I were going to systematize how to distinguish a specific kind of poker hand, how would I do it? And basically, like, there are all these patterns in values. Like one pair will have 2 of one kind of card and then 1 of 3 other kinds of cards. So that's what the values histogram is supposed to look for and sort of give you a report on. And then let's see, var values. I think line 8 is which is here. Oh, undo again. No, damn it. Delete. What am I trying to do? Shift V. There we go. There it's highlighted. Just returns the keys from the values histogram. So for instance, you can see what they are, like, is it an ace? Is it a 7? That sort of thing. And then it uses, down here, it uses, return this object, which is like the suits count, which just gives you the length of the keys on the suits histogram. This is useful for determining whether something's a flush or not, right? Like, a flush hand, this suits count will be 1. Every other kind of hand it'll be 2, 3, or 4. So we're going to look at that later. Values count is just the length of the values. So for instance, a card with a high card hand is going to have a values length of 5. A full house will have a values length of 2. A 4 of a kind will have a values length of 2. A straight would have a values length of 5. So that's what we're looking for here. And then values pattern, I'll probably go into that later. Has consecutive values. It's just a helper function to say, like, are these numbers all in order? Which I think it's like down at the bottom here. Yeah. So it like turns all the values into numbers, and then goes and like sorts them, I think, and then looks through them all and makes sure that each one is just one interval higher than the previous one. So that's how it's checking that. And then stop me if you have any questions too. Then we've got, okay, the pattern maker is the one I haven't talked about. So let me find that one. So if you give it a values histogram, it will, okay, it's line 50 here. How did this work? It would, oh, okay, right. So what this is looking for is, for instance, it'll return from the histogram that you had 2 of one kind of card and 3 of another kind of card, or 5 different kinds of cards. And this is, again, it's like when you look at how you determine what each kind of hand is, then that's a piece of information that you need to know. So, and then, so basically, on line 10 here, it's returning that object that we looked at here, right? So we're getting this analysis back from the analyzer, and then each of those keys is an argument that we give to the describer, which is okay, name is the function I gave it. So it takes a suits count, values pattern, which is an array, and then a Boolean, does it have consecutive values or not? And I guess I set them all as closure values, and then it returns a function called what is it, right? So what is it does is after playing around with the hand for a while, what I figured out is like the best way to do it procedurally. I don't think you ever really get away from procedure at some point, is to just sort of count down the values count, right? So some hands have 5, some hands will have 5 different values, some hands will have 4 different values, some will have 3, and some will have 2. You can't have one value because then you'd have like an extra card. So it's a switch case statement, and it just calls these evaluate 5, evaluate 4 methods. So evaluate 5, for instance, checks to see if they have consecutive values or not. So for instance, a straight, both a straight flush and a regular straight, will have has consecutive values, will be true. And then if the suit count is 1, then it's a straight flush, and if it's not 1, then it's just a plain straight. And then otherwise, it'll check to see if the suits count is 1 and return flush, because we know it's a flush hand without consecutive values. And then if it's not a flush hand, then it must be a high card. That's the only thing left it could be. Evaluate 4 is like, as a function, it's just a formality because 1 pair is the only one where you would have 4 different kinds of cards. Evaluate 3 this checks to see if it's 2 pair, or if it's not 2 pair, then it must be 3 of a kind. What's going on here? The values pattern, the first one is 1, and the second one, the index 0 is equal to 1, and index 1 is equal to 2, and index 2 is equal to 2 as well. Then that's identifying 2 pair. And if it's not that pattern, it's the pattern for 3 of a kind.
Right.
Cool. And then, yeah, last one here, function evaluate two. So full houses and 4 of a kind both have 2 different values. And again, like this line 64 here is just looking for the pattern that matches a full house. And then we don't have to bother looking for the pattern that matches 4 of a kind because we would be able to figure it out sort of by process of elimination. So that's the code there. And then there's also one other thing I should point out, which is like for the testing, which is the spec runner file. If you create secondary files, you need to link them explicitly in the spec runner file. So like if you're extracting an object, good practice is to keep it in a new file. So that's what I did here. So it'll run, and these two, the any-up.js file is dependent on the other 2, so they come first.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And a little interesting because when I decided to go more of a node route, so I was still using the same Jasmine file because there's Jasmine node, which I had used sparingly before for some other tutorial. So I was using that along with it. It worked well, but for some reason, the spec runner HTML file just stopped working. When I used the node version of it, basically like when I put in the require statement at the top of my test file, you can go to the HTML file, but it just says there are no tests. But you can run the tests in the command line, and it works fine. So I didn't really look into it deeply. As I was like, okay, it's still passing the tests. I can still run the tests. I just can't see them on the HTML file. So I was just gonna go back and take a look at that later on. But just in case anybody's using the Node version, you might run into that. I just don't know how to solve that yet.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't played around with Node. That's something I think about, but I need to get a job first and figure out what's the important thing to get really good at before I decide to do Node.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Node is like I really wasn't using any Node-y like type functions or methods. I was mainly using it just so I could do require, which I think there's its own thing, like a require JS or something like that. But I just used it in Node enough to where I could just do that, and I could also use it to run from the command line and pass through, do tests and stuff like that. So it's Node barely. It's about as basic. It's still JavaScript with just a little bit of Node on top, I guess.
Cool. Oh, there, now I can see my face. So yeah, I guess I'll push up my solution to GitHub, maybe as a separate branch on the. No, I'll post it on its own repo because I don't. If people want to use the test suite later, I don't want them like cheating and looking at my stuff because it'll like take away some of the adventure. So that's my plan there. Do we want to talk a little bit about the next challenge? Have you had a chance to look at it?
I've looked at it briefly, but I haven't looked at it super in depth. So we looks like we still have a little bit of time left in our hour, so we can certainly do that.
Sure, cool. So let me find it. The one change is that on Discourse, we're just gonna have all the groups on one thread. So you'll get Ruby, Python solutions there. So I'm gonna post the link here in the chat window for Tommy, and then I'll post it on Slack as well. All right, there it is. So Jamal was cool enough to come up with this for us. It's run through 10:13. I think he means 11:13. So 2 weeks from today. So next week we can talk about it and people can show off stuff, and then the week after that we'll like wrap it up and start the next one. I think that's going to be the pattern.
Yeah.
Oh, I should also mention just publicly that getting into the holidays, right? So Thanksgiving is on a Thursday. It turns out this year Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve are both Thursday nights. So I'm probably gonna skip JavaScript enabled those nights. I don't think anyone will be like too put out by any of that.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to make those days anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So so we'll have a 2-week break, like Christmas and New Year's basically, and then come back, start again in January. That's what I've been thinking for that.
Cool.
I was looking at my calendar. I was like, oh, those are all Thursdays.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. So the new challenge is, I think, meant to be Halloween themed. It's a let me share my screen. It's a zombie challenge kind of game, I guess. It's sort of like create if you have zombies in an enclosed space with humans, create a grid to demonstrate that, and then they should be able to like move around and like look for space, and like the zombie should hunt the humans, that sort of thing. This is obviously like Jamal is in the Python group, so I think this is meant to be like for Python people and Rubyists. This is like a command line. I think we could all do cool stuff like in the browser, obviously, like make an actual game where you chase after the like little picture of a zombie chasing after humans. So I'm really curious to see what we can come up with for this one. So he gives you, for instance, like if the room looks like this on turn 1, just sort of like play the game and like see how long it takes to turn all the humans into zombies. I think it's not, again, like just like the last challenge. It's not meant to be super structured. It's meant to be like have fun, do something creative with it.
Yeah.
Figure out what it means to you and like how you wanna riff on it. So that is, and then the stretch goals are like automate this. So like humans will avoid the zombie and the zombie will like hunt down the humans. But I don't know. I would think those are like central to the game, but and like you could do it where the zombie is in control, do it where only the humans are in control and the zombies are trying to hunt down human players. So that's for the next one. What do you think about it?
Yeah, well, when I looked at it earlier, the first thing that came to mind was so I know we've riffed on it before, but Eloquent JavaScript, at least in the newest version, which I think there's only 2 editions, so the second edition, there is like one of the chapters is just its own, like some of the chapters, are their own. It's just like we're going to look at one program and just go through it and add to it, and at the end you'll have a sort of like a full-blown program.
Okay.
So I think it's like one of the very first chapters that does that. It's something very similar to this. It's like, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's something like so instead of zombies and humans, it's like an herbivore and a carnivore, and like they start off on like a bigger grid, and there's also plants as well. So the herbivores will eat the plants, but the carnivores will try to eat the herbivores. And then it's just eventually, well, who at the end of the, however many times it runs, who's leading who wins, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty interesting. I may go back and look through that chapter and see if I can get any hints for this one. This one's not as complicated. At least on the surface, doesn't seem as complicated because there were a bunch of other variables in the one in Eloquent JavaScript. But it's very, very similar. If you go look at it, you'll say, "Oh yeah, it's like this, except with a couple other things thrown into it." But yeah, I'm interested to see how we can do this in the browser too, because I think it'd be really cool to have it automate. In a browser, well, it would look a lot better too, at least in my opinion, in a browser instead of trying to look at it in the command line and keep having it update one after one. But
yeah,
everybody who loves Python and Ruby can shun me for that.
I wrote a lot of command line games when I was first learning Ruby, and like they're fun, but user input and output and like rendering functions are basically untestable, and not totally untestable, but they're hard to test.
Yeah.
And it's not fun. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been wanting to get more into, like, in the browser with JavaScript. I'm thinking just off the top of my head, being able to, do timeouts with this. So after however many seconds they move, or it doesn't have to necessarily be on a grid. I don't know. I think there's a bunch of different approaches you can take to it with JavaScript, which is pretty cool. And I'll probably just keep playing around with it. It'll probably be like last time. I'll have some really convoluted way of doing it the first time, and then the second time we meet, hopefully it'll be a little bit better. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm excited about this one. This one looks pretty cool.
Cool, yeah. When I was teaching, I've never played with JavaScript Canvas, but some of the students did, where they were making, like, there was an arcade games week basically, where we just wanted we wanted them to practice with JavaScript. So they did have, you can use Canvas and some basic trigonometry to, like, make things move fluidly around the page and that kind of thing. So that might be an interesting learning opportunity for me. We'll see how much spare time I have between all my job hunt stuff to, like, really elaborate. Cool. Yeah, I guess that's it for me this week. Unless there's anything you want to talk about, I guess it's just a small bunch this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just interested to tackle this new challenge, and I'm gonna go back and clean up the anti-up one a little bit as well. But I definitely like the format of this, and getting to see how different people do it. I mean, I know it was just you and us, at least for this meeting, but just looking through your code, I saw a lot of awesome ways that you handled it, and interesting ways that I can see if I can integrate into my own. I like the way you structured yours a lot, with the separate files and having each sort of be their own, whatever the single responsibility principle, that they talk about in computer science and stuff.
Yeah, right. That was the idea of, like, being object oriented with it, instead of just, like, reading through. One of my friends said he was going to solve it, and then he said he was using regex somehow, and I was like, "Why are you using regex?"
Oh.
But who knows? Maybe I
don't like regex.
I'll get him. He said the last I talked to him about this, he said he had 20 tests passing out of 27. So maybe I'll make him post his solution to the discourse channel.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that, but man, I can't imagine that being pretty. Different regex.
He and I are part of a Rails Rumble team. Have you heard of Rails Rumble?
No, I haven't.
It's a worldwide hackathon. It's next weekend, not this coming weekend, but the weekend after. It's basically 48 hours. You're allowed to plan what you're going to do ahead of time, but you can't produce any code or any, like, assets, really. You can write user stories for it, but you can't write feature tests, for instance. Like, if it's code, you can't do it until start time.
Right.
And it starts at midnight UTC, which is like 4 o'clock for me here, 4 p.m. on Friday for me here, and goes until 4 p.m. on Sunday. And it's like 500 teams all around the world. And the idea is, like, you're not judged on your code, you're judged on the app you create, and it should be built in Rails. And so we haven't decided what we're building yet, but I'm pretty excited about it. It's going to be a long weekend. It's the group is 3 of us here in the Bay Area, and then my friend Nick, who lives in the UK. So he's going to be like the night shift or something. I'm not really sure how we're going to handle that, but it should be fun. I'm really looking forward to it.
That'd be really cool to do from a CodeNewbie perspective. I mean, I don't think that'd be something we do in the very near future. But I could see, after a few of these challenges, maybe after whatever the 5th one, hypothetically, then the next challenge is, okay, now we're going to do almost like a hackathon type of thing, where it's a lot more open-ended. And it's just, okay, do something in this theme. Mm-hmm. And then, it can either be, individually you go do it, or like the JavaScript team versus the Ruby team versus the Python team, or whatever. I think that'd be cool eventually to do. It'd be kind of hard doing it all remotely, but it'd be interesting, if anything. It'd be a nice experience.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do with the challenges, is, like, make them as language agnostic as possible so everyone can solve them in their own way.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cool. Well, all right. I guess we'll wrap up. We made it an hour, just us.
Yeah, that's perfect. It was perfect timing. Exactly perfect timing.
Cool. All right. Well, take care, Tommy. I will see you next week. And for anyone watching this later, reach out on Slack if you have any questions about the new challenge. I posted a link to it in the channel, to Jamal's discourse page. Post any work that you want to share to that discourse thread. All right. Bye, everybody.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Take care.